The ocean can be breathtaking, thrilling, and deadly, and for some people it can turn into a nightmare in the blink of an eye. In this video, you'll witness 6 stories of terror and survival at sea, from the churning waters off South Africa to the unpredictable currents near Baja, California. Massive sharks and even curious orcas transformed ordinary pursuits into life-or-death encounters. On August 8, 2025, the vast waters off the coast of South Africa seemed deceptively calm as a luxury 45-foot catamaran sliced through the waves, its sails full of steady wind, carrying 6 European friends who had come to celebrate their reunion with a voyage they believed would etch itself into memory for all the right reasons. The vessel was modern and sleek, designed for comfort and leisure rather than endurance against treachery. Yet the group, full of laughter and confidence, felt only the pull of the horizon and the thrill of freedom as the coastline stretched farther behind them. The sea, however, always carried its own secrets, and below the glittering surface lay an unseen reef waiting with merciless indifference. Without warning, the catamaran struck the submerged rocks, the sharp rise of coral and stone tearing through fiberglass with a grinding roar that seemed to split the air itself, and in an instant, the proud vessel lurched violently to the side, throwing its passengers off balance as water rushed through the ruptured hull with unstoppable force. The friends had no time to react, no chance to steady themselves, as the catamaran capsized with a sickening roll that sent bodies, gear, and shattered pieces of railing tumbling into the freezing, turbulent water. In moments, the world had inverted. What was once the deck now trapped beneath the surface, and the 6 survivors found themselves scattered, gasping and thrashing against the pull of waves that showed no mercy. Panic seized them as the cold bit into their skin, stealing warmth and clarity with every passing second, and the sea turned from playground to enemy as broken shards of their vessel floated like ghosts among them. Some grasped desperately for life jackets, while others clung to the jagged remnants of wood and fiberglass, their cries swallowed by the wind and spray. The ocean, restless and relentless, seemed intent on keeping them there, drifting helplessly in open water. But what came next would transform fear into terror. The thrashing of limbs, the frantic splashing, and the blood already leaking from small cuts and scrapes acted as a summons to something older and far deadlier than human despair. And soon a shadow emerged beneath the surface, vast and purposeful, circling with silent menace. A great white shark, 16 feet in length and drawn by instincts honed over millions of years, closed the distance, its massive frame cutting unseen arcs around the desperate swimmers. For long, breathless moments, the survivors felt only unease, a presence they could not yet name, before the truth revealed itself in a flash of pale belly and the sudden slicing fin that broke the surface only yards away. The predator struck with terrifying speed, its bulk rising from below in an explosion of foam as jaws armed with serrated teeth clamped down on the leg of one of the men, dragging him under in a violent thrash that painted the water red. His friends screamed in horror as the sea boiled with movement, and though he surfaced again, gasping and bleeding, the shark returned with relentless focus, tearing at him before shifting toward the others who kicked desperately to escape. Another man was seized by the arm, the crushing power of the bite-breaking bone and rending flesh, and the group splintered into chaos, each stroke a fight not only against the waves but against the certainty of death circling closer. 4 of them were injured within minutes, their wounds deep and spilling into the water, and the survivors could do nothing but endure the horror of snapping jaws that seemed to come from every direction. The shark circled back again and again, sometimes passing so close that its rough hide brushed their legs, other times diving deep before surging upward with a force that reminded them they were powerless in its world. The sea became a stage for terror where each second stretched unbearably long, and the friends clung to debris not as comfort, but as a fragile barrier between themselves and the creature that waited just beyond sight. 2 of them managed to grasp a broken railing that floated stubbornly above the waves, its jagged edge digging into their skin but keeping their torsos lifted above the waterline. And alongside them, a pair of half-inflated life jackets provided just enough buoyancy to create a fragile refuge. They watched with wide, unblinking eyes as the shark lunged again at their injured companions, who thrashed weakly, trying to keep blood from flowing too freely but unable to escape the predator's interest. Hours passed like lifetimes as the wounded drifted in and out of consciousness, their bodies pale from cold and loss, while the others remained locked in the torturous rhythm of anticipation. Every brush of kelp or slap of wave a cruel reminder that the shark was never gone, only waiting. Time stretched mercilessly, the sun climbing across the sky as the salt burned their wounds and their strength bled into the sea. The water rocked them with indifference, carrying them farther from land while the shark remained a constant shadow, its dorsal fin occasionally slicing the surface, as if to remind them that survival was not promised, but fought for second by second. They shivered violently, their muscles seizing, yet still they held to the debris, refusing to surrender despite the agony that pressed down on their chests and the cold that seeped into their bones. At last, when the horizon seemed empty of hope, a faint engine hum broke through the wind, and a rescue boat appeared as a speck that grew slowly but unmistakably larger, cutting through the swells with determined speed. The sight ignited a desperate surge of strength in the survivors, who raised trembling arms, clinging still to their makeshift rafts even as the shark circled one final time beneath them. The rescuers hauled them aboard, their bodies limp and heavy with exhaustion, blood trailing from deep lacerations that would scar them forever. Yet they were alive, carried from the nightmare sea into the frantic care of hands that pressed bandages and checked pulses. In the hospital hours later, doctors treated wounds with practiced urgency, stitching torn flesh and steadying hearts that beat too fast from fear, while the survivors lay wrapped in blankets, their eyes still wide with the memory of teeth and water. They would recount how the weight of the ocean pressed them down, how the snapping jaws closed so near their faces they felt the spray of salt and blood, and how only the stubborn will to cling to debris kept them from slipping beneath the surface. On the morning of August 17, 2022, the offshore waters of Queensland, Australia, stretched endlessly beneath a cloudless sky, shimmering in shifting blues as the swell rose and fell in steady rhythm, and out upon that restless expanse a fleet of boats prepared for the annual fishing tournament that drew professional anglers from across the region. Among them was Liam O'Connor, a seasoned competitor with years of experience and a reputation for skill and determination, who stood at the rail of his 20-foot vessel with the sun burning at his back and the salt spray cooling his skin. For Liam, the sea was both a challenge and a calling, and every tournament was another test against creatures that lived beyond the reach of land. But on this day, the ocean would reveal itself not as sport, but as predator. By mid-afternoon, the competition was fierce, with anglers reporting large catches and heavy lines straining under the pull of tuna and marlin that surged through the depths. And Liam's crew, a small but capable team, watched with anticipation as his rod bent violently under the weight of something massive below. The reel screamed as the line tore away, and Liam braced himself against the side of the boat, muscles taut as he fought to keep control of the furious creature hooked beneath. The other steadied the deck and cleared gear out of the way, giving him space as he leaned over, the taut line slicing through the surface and marking the struggle below. What he believed was a powerful tuna twisted and surged, thrashing toward the light, but the ocean always carried more than a fisherman could see, and another shadow had risen with intent far more lethal. From the deep, sudden, and unstoppable, a tiger shark nearly 13 feet in length surged upward, its body a blur of muscle and striped power, its jaws flaring open to clamp down on both the struggling tuna and the line that tethered it. The force was immediate and violent, jerking the rod from Liam's grip and wrenching his balance forward as the surface exploded in froth and blood. The boat rocked beneath the sudden weight of the predator's strike, and before he could recover, Liam toppled over the rail and into the chaos, his body crashing into the churning water alongside the wounded fish and the thrashing shape of the shark that had claimed it. Cold engulfed him, but there was no time to orient himself, no chance to think of escape, for the tiger shark, already in frenzy from the hooked tuna, shifted instantly toward the human presence beside it. In a blur of motion, the predator struck, its jaws clamping down with terrible precision on Liam's leg, the serrated teeth puncturing flesh and bone as it thrashed with the rolling power of the sea itself. The water turned dark in seconds as blood poured from the wound, spiraling in crimson clouds that only intensified the shark's violence. Above, the small vessel rocked violently. The crew was powerless as they reached for poles and ropes, their shouts drowned by wind and spray, their eyes wide with horror at the sight of their companion dragged beneath the waves. Liam fought desperately, clutching for the gaff that floated beside him, and with trembling strength, he thrust it forward in frantic attempts to drive the steel into the shark's flank. For a moment, the predator twisted, rolling in anger at the sudden sting, but its grip only tightened, its head jerking side to side in brutal arcs that tore flesh wider with every second. The ocean became a boiling arena of foam and blood, each wave carrying fragments of struggle to the surface as Liam's strength faltered against the sheer force of the predator. The gaff slipped from his weakening grip, vanishing beneath the surge, and the shark dragged him deeper, its massive tail beating water with the rhythm of inevitability. For the crew, leaning helplessly over the side, there was no means of intervention, only the terrible sight of fins slicing through the red-streaked water, and the brief glimpse of Liam's arms reaching skyward before the sea consumed him again. Time collapsed into heartbeats as the struggle raged below. But against a predator evolved for this purpose, there was no contest, and by the time the shark released him, its jaws loosening at last in satisfaction or instinct, Liam's body drifted upward, limp and still, already succumbing to the catastrophic blood loss and trauma inflicted in mere moments. The sea rocked him with indifferent rhythm, carrying him back toward the surface where the stunned crew pulled him aboard, their hands trembling as they pressed against wounds that no pressure could hope to stem. The tournament waters, once filled with shouts and the excitement of competition, now carried only silence around the small vessel as nearby boats turned toward the scene, drawn by the commotion but arriving too late to alter its outcome. The shark had vanished into the depths as quickly as it had come, leaving only the crimson trail to mark its passing, a reminder of how thin the line was between sport and survival in these unforgiving waters. The crew could do nothing but cradle their fallen angler as the boat turned back toward shore, the coastline now a distant blur against the horizon. And though radios crackled with urgent calls for medical aid, each passing minute confirmed the finality of what had occurred. By the time they reached the waiting rescue team, Liam was beyond saving. His life lost, not in the calm of old age or the silence of land, but in the furious embrace of the sea he had loved, claimed by the teeth of a predator that had acted on instinct rather than malice. His death rippled quickly through the fishing community. Word spread that the seasoned angler had been claimed in the midst of competition, when all his skill and preparation meant nothing against nature's raw force. The tragedy underscored what many already knew but often ignored, that offshore waters, however thrilling, remained unpredictable and dangerous, and that the apex predators who prowled them could turn a day of sport into a fatal encounter in the space of a heartbeat. In the summer of 2018, the waters off Monterey Bay glistened beneath a pale sky as the morning fog thinned to reveal a coastline where cliffs met restless waves, and it was there that lifeguard Mateo Alvarez carried out his patrol duties, scanning the currents with the sharp awareness built from years of training and countless rescues. The beaches attracted crowds of tourists during the season, but Mateo's attention was drawn away from swimmers that day when word reached him of a stranded seal pup struggling near a cluster of rocks just beyond the surf line, its cries thin and desperate as it flailed against the pull of the tide. Alongside him was Emily Chen, a visitor who had been walking the shore and noticed the animal's plight, and together they moved toward the water, believing it to be a straightforward rescue of vulnerable wildlife in distress. Neither of them knew that beneath the cold depths a predator far larger and more dangerous than the struggling pup had already closed in, drawn by instincts sharpened over ages of survival. Mateo was accustomed to risk, yet as he slipped into the wetsuit and pushed through the shallows, he felt only a surge of responsibility, not fear for the task ahead. And Emily followed cautiously with determination, convinced that saving the small creature was worth the discomfort of the icy water. The waves slapped against them as they edged farther from shore, the rocks jutting like dark teeth just beyond reach, and the pup's movements grew more frantic, its small body twisting against foam and current as if sensing what loomed unseen below. Mateo guided Emily around a floating mass of kelp, his body strong against the drag of the tide. But the bay was vast and indifferent, and each stroke carried them deeper into the hunting grounds of something they could neither see nor anticipate. From below, the 15-foot great white shark had already fixed upon the vibrations of the distressed pup, its massive body gliding silently through the shifting green of the cold Pacific, its eyes black and unblinking as it approached with calculated precision. The humans above, their legs kicking and arms slicing water in erratic splashes, had now added to the signals flooding its senses, and in moments instinct blurred target and prey, driving it upward with the raw surge of muscle and hunger. The first pass came without warning, a sudden eruption of power as the shark's bulk burst through the surface, jaws agape with rows of serrated teeth snapping so close to Mateo that the force of displaced water threw him backward, ripping the fabric of his wetsuit open across the chest and grazing flesh beneath. The sound of bone and muscle clamping shut reverberated through the water as he gasped, and in the same violent surge, the predator brushed past Emily, its sheer mass striking her with enough force to leave dark bruises spreading along her arm, even without the full weight of a bite. Panic crashed over them both as realization struck. that they were no longer rescuers of a helpless pup but intruders in the path of an apex predator that had risen to claim its meal. Mateo's training took hold in the blur of terror, his eyes scanning frantically for anything that might form a barrier between themselves and the shark, and his hands closed on a splintered piece of floating debris, likely torn from a small boat or dock, the rough wood barely buoyant yet solid enough to form a shield. He thrust it between them and the predator, pressing Emily closer to his side as the shark circled back, the fin slicing across the surface in wide arcs that spoke of patience rather than haste. Each pass tightened the circle, the predator testing, waiting for weakness, lunging at the splashes of arms and feet with jaws that snapped shut on empty water only feet away. The cold seeped deeper with every passing minute, numbing limbs and stealing strength, turning each stroke into an effort that drained rather than carried them forward. Yet still, Mateo pressed toward the distant outline of the rescue boat now cutting across the waves. Summoned by the commotion, the shark lunged again, its head rising in a violent snap at the plank. Mateo shoved outward, the impact rattling through his bones as the wood splintered but held long enough to redirect the jaws. Foam frothed around them, the sheer size of the creature dwarfing their own bodies, and the terror of being nothing more than flailing figures in its element bore down heavier than the weight of water itself. Emily's breathing grew ragged as she kicked weakly, her eyes locked on the dark shadow that passed beneath them again and again, sometimes so close she could see the scars along its rough hide and the ghostly reflection of light across its flank. Mateo, muscles burning and chest heaving, kept the plank pressed outward, shoving against currents that seemed determined to push them off course, each movement measured against the knowledge that fatigue was as deadly as teeth. The seal pup's cries had faded, lost to the deeper water, but the predator had shifted focus entirely, each snap of its jaws aimed now at the humans who dared remain afloat. The minutes stretched unbearably, time marked not by calm but by the rhythm of the shark's passes and the growing ache in their bodies as they fought exhaustion. The boat drew closer, but the final stretch felt endless, each meter bought with the weight of fear and the determination to keep moving despite muscles that screamed for rest. At last, the rescue crew leaned over, ropes cast and hands reaching, and Mateo thrust Emily upward, the wooden plank tumbling away as the shark lunged one final time beneath them, its massive head breaking the surface with jaws snapping shut on empty air. Emily was pulled aboard first, her body trembling with shock as bruises spread across her arm, and Mateo followed, dragged over the gunwale with blood seeping from the torn fabric across his chest, where the first near miss had left him marked. Below, the shark circled once more before descending into the depths, vanishing into the green darkness as swiftly as it had come, leaving only the churn of waves and the stench of salt and fear in its wake. Wrapped in blankets, their breath still ragged, the two sat in silence as the boat turned back toward shore. Each glance at the water served as a reminder of the vast predator they had narrowly escaped. In the hours that followed, doctors would tend to their wounds, bandaging torn skin and easing bruised muscle, but no treatment could erase the memory of jaws snapping close enough to taste the salt spray, or the certainty that survival had been balanced on moments and inches. On September 1, 2020, the waters off Baja California stretched wide and endless, the sunlight catching the crests of waves and scattering into brilliance. But below the surface, the sea shifted into a different world, darker, colder, and filled with hidden movement. Marine photographer Luca Bellini descended slowly near a steep drop-off where the reef gave way to open water, his breathing steady through the regulator as he adjusted his camera equipment, intent on capturing the powerful beauty of tuna schools that had gathered along the edge of the slope. He had made countless dives before, and his confidence came not from arrogance but from years of careful experience. Yet the sea remained unpredictable, and on this day it would show him just how fragile the line was between safety and catastrophe, when vision was stolen and predators moved unseen. At first, the dive unfolded smoothly, the water clear enough to track the shimmering bodies of tuna as they twisted in unison, flashes of silver cutting through the blue void in movements that spoke of survival and instinct. Luca hovered near the ledge, steadying his camera housing as he captured the arcs and swirls, aware of the reef behind him but focused on the spectacle ahead. Then, without warning, the clarity began to dissolve, the incoming current stirring silt and debris into the water until the world around him blurred, visibility shrinking to only a few feet. The sharp edges of the reef softened into shadows. The outlines of fish melted into haze, and the sense of space closed in with unsettling speed. Luca pressed forward cautiously, knowing such conditions demanded heightened awareness, but no lens or training could prepare him. for what surged suddenly from the darkness. The attack was explosive and immediate. A blur of speed and force as an 11-foot short-fin mako erupted from the clouded water in pursuit of a fleeing fish, its jaws gaping and teeth flashing white before clamping down in a strike so fast it seemed instantaneous. Luca barely registered the predator before pain seared through his lower leg, the shark's bite tearing straight through neoprene and flesh as its momentum sent him spinning violently in the suspended haze. His camera wrenched sideways, bubbles erupted from his mask, and the world became chaos as the force of impact disoriented him completely. Blood streamed from the wound, rising in a red cloud that mixed with the silt until he could no longer separate injury from environment, his vision swallowed by murk and panic. The predator did not vanish, for the mako circled back through the fog of debris, its body cutting arcs around him that stirred the sand and fragments into thicker clouds, the water now alive with unseen movement. Luca's heartbeat hammered in his ears, every pulse an echo of fear as adrenaline flooded his body, sharpening some senses while blinding others. He could not see clearly, could not track the exact position of the shark, but he felt its presence in the vibrations through the water, the subtle pressure waves that betrayed its speed as it swept close, sometimes near enough that he glimpsed the rough gleam of its flank before it disappeared again into shadow. Instinct and training fused in desperation as he gripped the metal housing of his camera with trembling hands, forcing himself to wield it not as delicate equipment but as a weapon, something solid to place between his body and the predator that hunted too near. He swung it outward each time the water shifted, striking at nothing more than currents, but trusting that when the shark closed in again, the steel edges would provide resistance, even momentary, against jaws capable of tearing through flesh with ease. Each second stretched unbearably long, the silence of the deep broken only by the rasp of his breath and the occasional rush of water displaced by movement too close to ignore. Disoriented and bleeding, Luca forced himself to find the reef wall again, pressing his hand to the rough surface and feeling along the contours with desperate determination, knowing that proximity to stone meant one less angle of approach for the predator. The rock tore his gloves and scraped his skin, but he ignored the pain, sliding along slowly, inch by inch, fighting against the pull of the current and the weakness beginning to creep into his leg as blood loss sapped his strength. Each push forward was met with the shark's presence, sometimes a sudden flash of motion in the murk, other times only the thrum of power felt in the water before it veered off again. Unsettled by the movements of the metal camera swung in its path, his breaths grew harsher, fogging the mask as his chest tightened, but he pressed onward, guiding himself upward along the reef slope until the faint light above grew stronger, the greenish haze of the surface drawing closer with each painful kick. His wounded leg dragged heavily, numb yet burning, the torn wetsuit clinging in tatters, and still he forced himself to ascend, pushing through the clouded water with the knowledge that only by reaching the air above could he escape the predator that waited below. The mako circled one last time, its sleek form brushing past him close enough that the pressure knocked him sideways against the stone, his knuckles splitting as they struck the reef, yet the shark did not close for another bite. Whether deterred by the thrashing camera, distracted by the cloud of debris, or satisfied by the first strike, it slipped back into the deeper water, vanishing as swiftly as it had appeared, leaving Luca suspended in a haze of blood and fear. Breaking the surface at last, he gasped into the open air, the bright sun blinding after the darkness below, his body trembling as the salt burned into the wound on his leg. He waved weakly toward the dive boat stationed in the distance, the crew already moving into action as they spotted the distress. And moments later, he was pulled aboard, his body collapsing onto the deck as hands pressed towels and bandages to the deep gash that stretched across his calf. The bleeding slowed under pressure, but the shock lingered, his eyes wide and unfocused as the memory replayed. The flash of teeth, the sudden strike, the helpless spinning through murky water with a predator circling unseen. Back on shore, doctors stitched the torn flesh and treated the bruising that spread across muscle and bone, and though he would recover, the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain. For Luca, the dive that had begun as a routine pursuit of beauty had transformed in seconds into a fight for survival. The encounter left him shaken but alive, a narrow escape from the jaws of a mako in waters that demanded respect, where the margin between documentation and disaster proved frighteningly thin. The South African coastline near Gansbaai had long carried a reputation that hovered somewhere between awe and fear, a stretch of water known for its breathtaking beauty, but also for the powerful predators that patrolled its depths. In 2023, Adventure kayaker Sophia Jensen set out alone along this rugged coast, drawn by the challenge and the solitude of paddling through one of the most unforgiving marine environments on Earth. Her early morning launch from a quiet beach was meant to give her time to cover distance before winds picked up, and for a while, the sea seemed to cooperate, rolling beneath her small craft in steady swells. She moved with calm determination, her paddle dipping rhythmically, her eyes tracing the jagged cliffs and outcrops that bordered the turbulent Atlantic. By mid-morning, conditions shifted. The water grew rougher, choppy swells slamming against the hull, and the sky darkened slightly as wind pressed down from the shoreline. She adjusted her course, edging closer to a rocky formation she knew well from maps and local warnings. Kayakers were advised to avoid such zones in heavy seas, but Sophia had always pushed boundaries, confident in her strength and skill. Out there, she was alone with the sound of the crashing surf and the raw, unbroken horizon. Every paddle stroke both a test and a declaration of independence. When search teams later pieced together the day's events, no one could say with certainty what had triggered the disaster. But evidence suggested that somewhere near the outcrop, a sudden surge of water, amplified by wind and tide, may have rolled her kayak. The small craft was later found overturned and drifting, scarred from collisions with stone. Whether Sophia had managed to cling to it or was separated immediately would remain unknown, but in that moment of chaos she was at her most vulnerable. The waters near Gansbai are notorious for one reason above all: great white sharks. They thrive along the drop-offs and hunting grounds where seals gather, their massive silhouettes cutting silently through the cold, nutrient-rich currents. For decades, researchers and thrill-seekers alike had come to this stretch of coast to witness these apex predators, yet few could imagine the speed and finality with which one could strike. For Sophia, capsized and exposed, the risk was immediate. Days later, after an exhaustive search hampered by heavy swells, her body was still missing. The only trace the search teams had was her kayak, discovered floating upside down near the outcrop, battered by waves. Hope faded quickly, replaced by grim resignation. Then came the call from a commercial fishing crew operating 2 miles offshore. Their nets had caught something massive, a great white shark measuring nearly 20 feet long. When authorities arrived to inspect, their discovery sent a chill across the community. Inside the stomach of the predator, they found human remains, later confirmed as belonging to Sophia. The revelation was both horrifying and final. Experts examining the evidence believed the sequence of events was tragically straightforward. Sophia's capsize, whether sudden or drawn out, left her struggling in turbulent waters. Separated from her kayak or clinging weakly to it, she would have been splashing at the surface, vulnerable and exposed in the very environment where great whites excel at detecting movement. For an animal built to hunt swiftly and decisively, the opportunity was one it did not ignore. The strike was believed to have been powerful and overwhelming, a moment in which survival would have been virtually impossible. To those who studied sharks, the tragedy was not framed as an act of malice, but of instinct. Great whites patrol hunting grounds with precision, guided by senses tuned over millions of years to detect prey and distress. To them, a lone human struggling in rough seas presented no difference from a seal or other marine animal. Yet for the people on shore, for the rescuers and her grieving loved ones, the distinction did little to soften the loss. In the aftermath, local authorities renewed their warnings about solitary water activities in predator-rich waters. Gansbai had long attracted divers, kayakers, and thrill-seekers eager to test themselves in its notorious conditions, but Sophia's death underscored the brutal reality of such choices. Even the most skilled athlete could be undone by a sudden capsize, a shift in weather, or the silent approach of a predator that no amount of preparation could fully anticipate. For days, the story echoed through the coastal towns. Fishermen spoke in hushed tones about the size of the shark, its immense girth and power, a reminder of how insignificant a lone human could be in such a domain. Rescue officials described the difficulty of searching in pounding surf, their boats rocked by the same swells that had likely overturned her kayak. To them, the ocean had felt both endless and impenetrable, a force that swallowed efforts and returned little. What lingered most, however, was the image of a single kayaker venturing into waters where strength, skill, and spirit might still be eclipsed by raw, natural power. Sophia had embraced the freedom of the sea, but freedom in such places came with risk written into every wave and current. Her end was a stark reminder of how quickly adventure could cross into peril when conditions aligned against survival. In Gansbai, the sea has always belonged first to its predators, and in 2023, it claimed another life in a manner as swift as it was merciless. Amara Voss had spent years chasing the thrill of open water racing, mastering the wind, the swell, and the unpredictable moods of the sea, and during the offshore regatta near Cape Point, the conditions were as unforgiving as they were exhilarating. With sharp gusts sweeping across the whitecaps and boats carving aggressive lines through the swells. But nothing in her long sailing career could have prepared her for the sudden and unnerving encounter that unfolded that day. Her yacht, a sleek 30-foot racing vessel designed for speed and agility, cut tightly across a stretch of rolling water. Sails strained against the wind when the first ripple of unease rippled through her. A distinct disturbance beneath the surface, broad shadows sliding alongside the hull, too synchronized to be anything but orcas. The pod moved with deliberate grace, their towering dorsal fins slicing above the chop, and Amara's pulse quickened as she realized just how close they were to her boat. Then the massive bull revealed itself, rising and rolling with startling proximity, its sheer size dwarfing her craft, and in a single powerful surge, it rammed the hull with a force so jarring that the yacht pitched violently, throwing Amara off balance and slamming her hard against the deck. Pain erupted across her chest and shoulder, the impact leaving her gasping, ribs stabbing with sharp heat as she clutched for something to hold on to, and in that instant, the adrenaline that every racer knows flooded her body. But this time it wasn't the thrill of competition, it was survival. The bull lingered beneath the stern, circling with unnerving precision, its white markings flashing through the rolling water as it nudged at the yacht's underside again, sending vibrations up through the keel. Loose lines snapped across the deck, a gear bag tumbled into the spray, and Amara forced herself upright despite the pain, knowing that one wrong move, one slip into the water, would put her directly in the path of one of the most intelligent and powerful predators in the ocean. Her fingers worked swiftly, tying off loose sheets, steadying the helm, forcing the boat back into some semblance of stability, but the orca showed no sign of leaving. Another nudge to the stern sent her skidding across the deck, her bruised shoulder screaming in protest as she caught herself against the rail. Every instinct told her to remain calm, to avoid any frantic movement that might draw further interest, yet her heart raced uncontrollably as she tracked the pod circling with eerie patience. The smaller orcas swam alongside the bull, surfacing and dipping back into the waves with powerful ease, while the massive male returned again and again to press against the hull, as if testing the strange object that dared to cut so swiftly through its territory. For long minutes, Amara's world shrank to the sound of splintering waves, the groan of her stressed yacht, and the explosive exhalations of the orcas surfacing just meters away. She tried to steady her breathing, adjusting her grip on the wheel and shifting her weight to account for the battered rig, forcing herself to think through the haze of pain. If she fell, even for a moment, the outcome could be catastrophic. Though orcas were not known for indiscriminate attacks on humans, their immense power and unpredictability in such close proximity turned her racing yacht into a fragile shell adrift among giants. A sharp crack of pain in her side reminded her of the cracked rib, every breath short and shallow. But she focused on what she could control, keeping the vessel upright, avoiding any sudden lurch that could topple her into the cold depths. She trimmed the sails carefully, using the wind to steady the boat and create distance, even as the bull returned once more to push at the stern, sending shockwaves up through the hull. The encounter stretched on, each passing second heavy with dread, and the ocean around her became a stage for an unpredictable dance between human and predator, fragile yacht and apex hunter. The bull surfaced again, towering fin cutting the water before it slipped beneath the waves with the force of a torpedo, reappearing at the bow before falling back into the depths. Amara braced herself, every nerve anticipating another strike, her muscles tight with exhaustion and fear. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the mood shifted. The pod slowed, circling one last time before peeling away into deeper water, their immense bodies vanishing beneath the swells with uncanny silence. The tension snapped, leaving Amara trembling with the realization that she had endured minutes that felt like hours, balanced on the knife edge between control and catastrophe. With the orcas gone, the wind returned as her only adversary, and she forced herself to focus on the course ahead, guiding her battered vessel back into formation, ignoring the throbbing pain that pulsed with every movement. The other boats were distant specks on the horizon, unaware of the storm of fear and adrenaline that had erupted aboard her yacht, and she alone bore the weight of what had happened in those haunting moments offshore. By the time she reached port, her body was bruised, her ribs aching with every breath, and medics quickly assessed her injuries, wrapping her side and noting the deep bruising along her shoulder and arm, the kind of trauma only sheer impact could cause. Yet the greater impression was not the pain in her body but the stark memory of the pod. the immense intelligence in their movements, and the raw reminder that even seasoned sailors remain vulnerable when the ocean's apex predators choose to interact. The incident quickly circulated among the regatta community, sparking debates about the unpredictability of orca encounters, and though experts assured that such behavior was likely curiosity rather than aggression, the reality for Amara was carved into her memory. She had come face to face with wild orcas not as a spectator, but as an unwilling participant in their world, and the raw power she felt beneath her hull would remain with her long after her bruises faded. For Amara, the regatta near Cape Point became more than a race against rivals and wind. It became a confrontation with the untamed forces of the sea, a reminder that no amount of skill or preparation can strip away the unpredictability of the wild, and that survival at sea is always balanced on the shifting edge of nature's will.